So some of you may have heard old Eagles back there. You recognize it a little bit. I call this presentation, teaching news literacy or doing dirty laundry. Okay. We all know who doesn't know what this song is about. Does anyway? That's okay. Let me tell you. Okay. That's why we're here. So, do we like the Eagles first and foremost? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, now I know.
Yeah.
It was a little too early there. I didn't quite.
You can teach journalism by listening to the Eagles, by listening to Bruce Springsteen, by watching Jon Stewart. That's what's great about it. I just want you to listen to the first few lines of this and we'll talk about it. You can sing it if you want.
Something I can use.
I could have been an actor, but I wound up here. I just have to look good. I don't have to be clear. Okay. Come and whisper in my ear, give us dirty laundry. He's talking about the news media. He's talking about, this was sort of in that era where, the Eagles felt very sort of vilified by the media and they were in their face all over the place and kind of before they split and went separate ways. I love this song because, for one, I think music is a great way to teach, especially a concept like news literacy. You can find songs that you can explicate with your students to sort of get them into it. But I also like this song because it really gets at the heart of what news literacy is all about. Okay? We're going to talk specifically about the definition of news literacy and what that might look like in your classroom. But we're going to do it through sort of 3 entry points. And we're going to get at the heart of this idea of doing dirty laundry, kind of cleaning some things up to make a better media world, a better educational experience for our students, and to make them more critical consumers. Okay, so we are going to do these 3 things today. Sort of understand what the main concepts of news literacy are and how you would teach those in your classroom. So what are some best practices for teaching news literacy? We're going to look at the JA News Literacy curriculum, and also in doing that, we'll look at the whole curriculum project. Have you guys looked at that at all, pulled it up and kind of seen some of it? Awesome. Okay. So if you're a JA member, you may already have seen it. If you're a new member, just from being here, hopefully it'll be a lifeline for you, and guide you throughout some tough times if it's your first year or anything like that. And then I want to answer any questions you might have or provide resources for how you might actually execute this in your classroom. Okay. So let's start with asking ourselves, what is news literacy? I worked at the museum for a couple years when I was working on my PhD, and this was one of the quotes. If you've been inside, have you been there? It's awesome. It's like Disney World for journalists and teachers. It is the first time I visited this, the lady in the front thought I was crazy because I walked in and I was like, I'm going to work here one day. She was like, here's your ticket, ma'am. And 6 weeks later, bam, I was working there. It was awesome. So, what is news literacy? Do any of you feel like you teach it? This makes sense to me. I kind of get it. I think I teach it, but I'm not totally sure what it is. What do you think it is? Guesses? Yeah.
I think news literacy is our students' understanding of anything and everything that has to do with the news. So they constantly increase their news literacy by understanding different demographics. They increase their news literacy by making sure that they understand what the new technologies are feeding in to that news. But I think news comes in all different formats. So papers, magazines, broadcasts, they understand all 8 mediums and are continuously increasing their literacy through that.
Yeah. I think the most important thing that you said was continuously increasing. That is so key to news literacy. It's a process, not like a destination, and that's huge. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's a process. It's
yes.
a process of understanding information. It's not just,
Exactly.
They have to understand they have to do this,
right.
this, and this.
Right, yeah, there's no formula, right? It's adaptable, it's flexible, yeah.
And it's being savvy,
yes.
Understanding who the messenger is, and if they have a slant, being able to decode the messages that are hidden in the message.
Yeah, absolutely. Decoding, encoding. I use You know, it's all these things, but really, if we had to boil it down, what really is it? This is actually a definition that the McCormick Foundation uses. They fund a lot of news literacy curriculum and projects, and they've come up with this as sort of their catchphrase. And I really, really like it because of one very specific phrase in here. So they say to be news literate is to build knowledge, to think critically, act civilly, and participate in the democratic process. So we do this in school all the time. We build knowledge. Okay, we're doing that with our journalism classes. We do that in any other class. That's education. We know that through student journalism, students learn to think critically and problem solve. This act civilly part that really, really gets me, and why I really love this definition. Yeah, our students, we sometimes don't act the most civil when we engage with media, especially social media. Okay, so this definition opens up a sort of personal obligation, personal responsibility to engage with the news media in a civil, responsive, effective, discerning way. Okay, not in a knee-jerk kind of way. And that's why I love this definition. And then obviously, you know, we want to encourage them to participate in the democratic process. The very practice of journalism does that. And news consumers may not realize that just by choosing to read this or choosing not to read that, they are participating in the democratic process, but it doesn't have to stop there. Okay? They don't have to just consume, they can also engage. This is my more specific definition, and this is the definition I use when people say, well, what comes out of a news literacy curriculum? What would students learn? How would we know what they're doing? What's the goal? Okay, and I would point them to this. So it's a process through which students learn to discern fact from fiction. Somebody said that. Okay. Assess material and personal bias. So not just the bias that's inherent in our story. We know that stories are constructions. They're frames. Okay? And not in a malicious way. We're taught to do that because we know as humans we process things through a frame of understanding. That's good journalism. It's not malicious, but we want them to understand that it's still construction. Okay, but we also want them to know their personal bias. What do they bring to the table that filters their perception of what's happening? Okay? And they are not good at that. A lot of us are not great at that. And that's why it's a process. Every time you think, oh, I've come to an understanding about this, you get new information and you have to reprocess. And so we want to deal a lot with our own personal bias and how that might affect the news we're getting. They evaluate the quality of news, and then finally they actively engage with news media. Okay? So it's not enough for them just to consume. News literacy requires them to be active. News literacy falls under what I call, like lovingly and kind of, you know, sarcastically, the new literacies. Okay, and I say new because information literacy is not new. It's called education. We've been doing it for a really, really long time. So it's sort of this umbrella idea that we have changing technology, we have new means of communication. We've got to figure out a way to get our students to be savvy about all of those. Okay, so we call these many, many different things, but my favorite term for all of these things is scholastic journalism. Okay? Yes, we do it. I love news literacy. Obviously, I'm here teaching it to you, but I am a journalist first and foremost. I am a First Amendment advocate first and foremost. So when people say, oh, the new literacies, we don't need journalism, we just need to teach news literacy or media literacy, okay? To me, that's sort of like saying, we don't need any certified car mechanics, like the people who fix things and do things. Let's just add 6 months to driver's ed, okay? We'll be fine, it's cool, nobody will get in a wreck. Like, that doesn't work, okay? So we cannot teach one without the other. We cannot teach these new literacies of consumption and how to deal with that as consumers without also teaching how to create a really good product. So they go hand in hand. Okay, so why might you teach news literacy? This is what I think you should teach it. I think there are a lot more reasons, but these are the ones that I encounter the most with the teachers that I work with. Some of you may are already, or in the course of your career, deal with an administrator, a school board, a parent who doesn't think what you do is worth anything. Journalism is dying, they tell you. Okay? Journalism is already dead, they tell you. Why would we do this? Kids don't need to do this, and it's gonna be gone by the time they graduate, okay? News literacy is a means of shoring up the foundation of your program, speak in their language, the administrator language, of competencies and outcomes and standards, without saying the word journalism, which like wigs them out, okay? So I've had conversations with teachers who say, you know, I have a principal who doesn't get journalism. How can I prove to them that we're doing things that affect all students and not just journalists? And I think news literacy is a way to do that. So if you find yourself in that position, you can email me but also think about how bringing this angle in can really help shore up the foundation.
I'm currently fighting sort of the opposite of that.
Okay.
I feel like it's meaningful to teach this portion of it at the beginning, and my principal, my administration just wants to push out the content, and they don't really like understand that you need all of this before they do that. So, what are some ways that I can sort of convince, you know, my administration or my principal that I need like 3 weeks at the beginning at least for, you know, just the beginning foundations of journalism, because I have a class that has, it's like journalism 1 through 5 all together.
And they just want you to get the paper out.
They just want the paper out, that's it.
For
Yeah.
6 weeks, there better be a paper.
Yeah, like that's the thing, they're expecting it, and we're moving online, so now my principal's like, well, will something be ready by the end of the first week of school? And it's like,
Yeah, and I hear that the biology class is taking a test in 5 days.
Right.
And that the calculus students are actually done. Like, we're done, we're good.
But that's the thing, they just like want it out so that they have something to show, you know? Yeah.
That's a weird dilemma, because usually it's the other way around. I actually never encountered that. So, bravo. You know, the best thing I could say is, like, if you can go back, how many years have you been there?
This will be my 4th
2 years.
Yeah.
I would go back, like, pick up the first couple papers from, you know, 1, 2, 3 years, and have a conversation about, like, well, hey, this year they had 3 weeks of background, and look how good it was, or this year we really jumped into it, and kind of give them an idea of how the quality suffers when you do that.
Right.
Even if you're expanding the truth a little bit, I don't generally recommend that. But in this case, I would say, like, hey, here we only had 1 day to talk about what is journalism and what is news literacy, and see how this paper, the content's not balanced, or they could have done this and it was only this. Just try and like contextualize it for them.
Yeah.
That would be, so I'm gonna think about that some more.
Thank you.
But give me your email afterwards and we'll see. That's a weird problem. Okay, so also prep students for the future, so that argument that maybe 2 of your students will be journalists, but all of them will be consumers, and producers. Like, they don't realize that their tweet is a media production, their Facebook post is a media production, okay? And then finally, I think the reason that you should teach it is to complete that circle, okay? The sort of consumer producer circle. We live in a world now where, you know, producers and consumers are sort of the same thing, and students don't realize that until they're forced to live on both sides. So in journalism, they live on one side, they live on that supply side. We're supplying news, we're supplying information. But if at the same time you force them to think about the consumer side of it, they're gonna become better journalists just by completing that circle, just by understanding what does an audience think about what you're doing, okay? And look at it from that perspective. Okay, and then this is like my soapbox. This has a slide or 2 or 3 or the whole thing that's like my soapbox. This is actually a picture from some graffiti on the Berlin Wall, which is why I'm here with this. News literacy is sort of, I think it should be, for teaching it correctly, a very strong yet gentle and kind slap in the face to say, if you are not creating and demanding good media, you are part of the problem. You're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Okay, and what I mean by that is, you know, it used to be that lawyers were like the bottom of the scum scale. Somehow journalists have like gotten below them, underneath them. My dad was, when I decided to be a journalist, he was like, I thought you were gonna be a lawyer. He hates lawyers. Like, he's an accountant, he hates lawyers. And I was like, what is that about? And he said, you know, at least lawyers, you know, they make a lot of money, so you can have a nice house. But journalists, nobody likes them, and you're gonna have to live in a shack. My dad is a real character. Western Colorado, on his tractor, he's awesome. So part of this is elevating the status of journalism by teaching students that if they demand better news, journalism will respond. We live in a supply economy. So if we stop demanding and purchasing junk, okay, eventually, it's gonna take a while, but we will get better news. So their choices are part of the solution to what everybody says is the problem, which is bad news, okay? So it's helping them see that they're a part of this. So I'm gonna show you real quick a little satire piece. Some of you may have seen this. I always preface this by saying, this is something I would show with 11th or 12th graders. I would not probably show it to 9th or 10th graders because there's some language in there. You know your students, you know your parents, most importantly. You know your parents and which ones might call you up and say, I heard you know this in class, okay? So take it with a grain of salt, but it's an awesome satire to get them thinking about what they believe about news, what's good and bad, and what might we do to kind of make it better. Okay, so you can see A, that was really funny in 2007. Because, you know, that's when it was made, and we get it. Leave right there for a second. So, I like this because news literacy can kind of be a topic and a lesson where sometimes you feel like your head's sort of in a petri dish, because you're really like, it's macro, it's micro, we're reflecting, we're thinking, we're out, we're in, all this stuff. So this is a good way to bring students into what their expectations and their perceptions of news happen to be. Okay? So we would watch this, and you know, if I had younger kids, like you could stop it at certain parts, you could just show a clip, whatever. And we would talk about, okay, so what are the messages here? What's like the overarching satirical message? So like level 1, layer 1, the first onion peel, yeah.
Oh, was that our standard for what the newsworthy is?
Yeah, like this is what we call the news?
Yeah.
Seriously? Okay, yep, absolutely. So then what's another one? Yeah.
Basically, that news is inane.
Yes.
You know, it means nothing and
Irrelevant.
and everything looks
value.
the same, and everyone. It's
Yeah.
It's reactionary. And
Yep. Okay. Definitely. Yeah.
People care more about celebrities than they do real people.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely that part of it. Like we care more about all this sort of celebrity paparazzi type tabloid material than what's happening in the rest of the, like we cuckold our fur because there's a finger in our food. And you might remember that story from 2007. Like there was a finger in some chili, and gosh, you would never know that we were in the middle of a couple wars. Okay. So what's probably the underarching message?
Culture's illiterate.
The culture might be illiterate, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's part of it. They only say it a couple times in the course, so you might have to show it to your students a couple times, but they say, yeah.
Our news is skewed.
It's skewed, yeah, that's part of it. Okay, and then they say, the world is greatly affected by what we put into the news. What we choose to show affects the world. And it's one of those assumptions about news that we don't think about in an active way, but when we stop and we say, okay, what does news deliver? What do we expect? Why does news exist and why does it matter? It gets at the heart of journalism, the heart of that watchdog for the state, what we deserve to be seeing in the news. Okay. And I like it because it also gets at the heart of the more technical side of news literacy, which is a lot of research that has shown that what we do put in the news does kind of matter, and the quality of what you consume matters for how you build your own notions of what's going on in the world. Okay? So it brings it back to the idea that journalism is important and news is important.
I think it also is really telling when you have like a brainstorming session with your kids and they want to mimic all of these, media types, because every time we do brainstorming, they're like, well, did you hear about Kim and Kanye? And I'm like, what a school newspaper. Why are we trying to report upon this stuff that has, yes, it's interesting, but what's the angle that we can get at with this? And that's, well, it's interesting to the kids, and that's what they want to do that. So, but they mimic all of that, and even with their opinion writing, it's sort of like going for the jugular, but why? Like, they don't understand why they're doing it.
Right, exactly. They don't understand, this idea of like why create a product that somebody else could create. The paparazzi are doing a good job of it, so what can you make as a student journalist that contributes to your community that's unique? Yeah.
I think there's an assumption in the video that it was better at one point, right?
Yes.
Certainly, at the very beginning, we used to have these 3 channels and we could believe Ron fighting others, and now everything's gone.
Yes.
Right? And is there truth to that, do you think, or do you think that are we in fact worse off now than we once were?
Well, so as a person, personally, I would say, yeah, there's truth to that. I think that that sort of golden era of news was good in a lot of ways, but a lot of it had to do with the expectations, of consumers. You expected that the Washington Post had breaking, investigative, enterprise news, and we also funded it. So I think because of those structures are gone, yeah, I do think we're missing some of that. But then as a scholar teacher, I would say good news still exists. We just don't pay for it. We don't get it. We're not willing to pay for it. We don't seek it out. And so therefore it lives on the fringe of most media, and most media is not as helpful. So that's my two-sided equivocating answer for it, Adam. I don't know. Anybody else? Agree, disagree? Yeah.
No, I'm going to disagree.
Go for it.
When I was at this little paper in Oregon, we did 100 years ago today.
Yeah.
And they had 3 little newspapers in our town. They had the Republican paper, which was the progressive paper. They had the Democrat paper, which was the racist paper. And they had the populist paper, which is the Eastern banks are killing us. All of them wildly inflammatory. Why are they biased in a way that we don't see today?
Sure. Yeah, you never know. News might not be answered.
If you look through time, there's always been crap.
Yeah, absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
Sunset Boulevard, that was 1950.
Yep.
I think your point is pressing, though, that we have to seek it out now.
Right, right. It's no longer just thrown out our front door. Yeah, there's always, where there's a will, there's a way to print. Yeah, totally. That's a great point. Okay, so let's talk now. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to add that and say, maybe with.
So let's talk about the main concepts of news literacy. So these would be the concepts that sort of guide how you might teach it and what your students might get out of it. This was created by a mix of, and I use this with their permission. You'll get this PowerPoint. Do you guys have Dropbox? Is that how you're doing stuff?
On our website.
On our website, yeah, okay. So you can use this like for educational purposes. They've given me permission to reprint these things, but not like for anything else, right? So some of these names might I have a broken finger, so I'm like, it looks like I'm cooking off. And then all here. Hey, kids, hey, kids. I got a broken finger, remember? All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's talk curriculum. Let's talk JA's news literacy curriculum. We're ready. Are you guys ready? Sorry. Okay. I didn't know. I mean, like, at the museum, I used to be dressed. No judgment. Okay. At the museum, I'll tell you a little anecdote. I used to teach everything from like 3rd grade to college and sometimes professionals, and you would never know what you would get on any given day. And so like I'd be literally dressed up like Thomas Jefferson, about the Founding Fathers, and then like I have 5 minutes and in comes, you know, like a group of sophomores from George Washington University, and you like have to forget that you probably don't need to go clap once if you can hear me, clap twice if you can hear me, to the George Washington students. So, you know, that for me was a lesson in like adaptability. Okay, so I'm going to teach the George Washington students the same way as I taught the 3rd graders, but they did like the Thomas Jefferson hat, which tells you that we're all just kids at heart. They all got lice and that. Not that the kids did, not the George Washington sophomores. Anyway, good time. Go to the museum. Don't try on the hats, but you go. So let's talk about the curriculum. So I want to give you sort of an overview about what the news literacy curriculum is like. I'll take you to the site, walk you through a few things, and then we will talk about, we'll pull some lessons from each area, and actually I'll walk you through. So I wrote the news literacy curriculum, and I say that only because truly, if you try it out and something didn't work, please let me know. We've all been there. Like I have just like crashed and burned some lessons, and it's fine. We recover, we go back to work, and we try again. But I'd rather know than like 4 years later to hear, well, 15 teachers tried this one lesson and it was terrible, and it's been sitting on the site for 4 years. Okay, so totally let me know. I'm really hard to offend. That's also from working with like 3rd graders in college. I'm really hard to offend. 7 weeks of curriculum is what I developed. It's really 6, and then there's 1 week that's specifically tailored to exploring news literacy on a publication staff. So maybe you don't have time for a class, you don't want a class, whatever, you just want to do a few things with your yearbook or your newspaper to help them think about some news literacy concepts while also becoming better student journalists. That week is for you, okay? But the other 6 weeks, they're out there. Let's say, you know, your teacher says, well, we don't have enough preps for you and you can't just teach journalism all day, so you're going to have to teach English. And then you say, no, how about news literacy? Okay, and then you pull it out so that you don't have to teach English. Some of us love, some of us hate, but, you know, I always prefer to teach journalism. So you can do it like that. You can pick and choose, but we give you some guidelines for doing that because it is a curriculum. These are not plug and play lessons. You can't just go to week 4 and pick lesson 3 and it's going to jive, okay? We did that very intentionally because if you Google teaching news literacy or news literacy lessons, you will find lessons and activities. They are not a curriculum, and we want you to see the whole scope and sequence and how you might build this throughout to get to those learning objectives. So there comes for a line that may not mean anything to you, or you know, for your state now, maybe your state's on the way out, whatever. In 2 years, when we're all on something else, we'll realign them to whatever we need to realign them to. But for right now, they are Common Core and P1. Some of you may have heard that, the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. They're also aligned to those learning outcomes as well. There are materials, anything you need to teach these lessons are in the curriculum website. PowerPoints, examples, handouts, rubrics, assessments, quizzes, anything you need, it is there, okay? But you cannot, I can't emphasize this enough, and I say this with all love in my heart, You cannot just make copies of it and like pass it out to everybody, because there are examples from Yahoo News and professional newspapers, and they have given us educational rights for this use, but not to like distribute in mass. Okay, so just know that. But there's some really great examples. The New York Times didn't really care, they never responded to my emails, but some other people did, so you'll get some cool ones. The 6 weeks is designed to complement the material you already teach. Having been a journalism teacher in high school and now in college, and having been a journalist, I really feel like you can't and you shouldn't teach news literacy in a bubble. So I wanted to design a curriculum that you could teach in complement with your journalism classes, because you probably are already teaching news literacy, you just don't know it. So let me show you a little bit about what I think that looks like. All of the lessons in the curriculum deal with these 6 areas. And it's because I think you probably already cover this, maybe in Journalism 1, maybe during the course of your publication staff, whatever. So the lessons are designed to fit into these categories, and as you teach them, you could teach news literacy. Okay, so you probably teach the First Amendment under the guise of 45 words that give us the freedom, but here's libel and obscenity, these are the limitations. Okay, we talk about that in the curriculum as how does the First Amendment act as a guide for the kind of media we should demand and the kind of role journalists should play? So it emphasizes that watchdog nature, that fourth estate, which really is really critical to news literacy because it helps students understand why we need to demand better. Journalism history, you might teach this a little bit. This is kind of maybe the stepchild because you may just look at it from like the evolution of mediums, telegraph, radio, TV, cable, all that kind of stuff. But we would look at it as a guide to understanding kind of what Adam was talking about, where journalism has been. Was it always really the golden age and everything's perfect? And where it is now, and some of the sort of consumer questions about that. I mean, it's a springboard into like, what's the future of journalism and news literacy? You probably already do the business of journalism because you teach students how to sell ads. How many ads do you have to sell to do a full color, 32-page full color CMYK paper? How many ads does that take? Okay, so to take a news literacy angle at that, you would talk about things like profits and who owns what and media consolidation, and they would, instead of just understanding how it works in their newspaper, also understand how it works in the media world at large, and that helps them understand why things are the way they are. Non-stop. You probably are dealing with this now as you're trying to navigate, should we do social media? Should we have a Twitter account? How do we do online? Is it web first, or are we a web first publication and then we print a newspaper? So you're probably actually creating some guidelines for this right now with your staff and figuring out what that might look like. So the news literacy side to that is considering what medium, what platform is the best at delivering news. What are some limitations and why? What does a consumer expect from Twitter that they're not going to get from your website, or vice versa? And then citizen journalism, you may have students at your school that come up and say, I want to write something, or how do I do this? And one thing that I always try and impress upon people is like, that's awesome. Use your student journalists to help teach your citizen journalists, your other students, how to contribute to news. Why not? Like, public forum, open the door, but be leaders in that and help them do it right, and help them understand that their role as a student journalist actually does mean something. They're not citizen journalists. The student, random student who comes in, you could be the citizen journalist. We're real journalists, so let's help you. We bring you into the fold. And then finally, journalism and social responsibility. This gets at those bigger news literacy questions of what is the role of journalism in a 21st century society? Should journalists be the ones advocating for their own profession? You don't hear random citizens saying, we demand good journalists. We demand good newspapers. It's the journalists who are doing that, and that's an awkward position, right? They're trying to save their own jobs, and they're trying to tell us why it's important, and that doesn't always work out. So we should also have citizens advocating for journalists. So these are the areas that all of the news literacy curriculum fall under, and I want to show you just kind of what that looks like. You probably already have logged in. It sounds like some of you have. But if you haven't, and if you're a new member just from being here, you'll get your member number, and then you will log in. And it's curriculum.ja.org. And you'll log in, and this is what you'll see. And it's an adaptive site, so you can use it on an iPad, you can use it on a mobile device. It's hard to tell on the screen, but it actually does sort of adapt to the size. You can read about why we did this the way we did it, and a little bit more about the initiative. This is cool if you haven't seen this. I get it, man. We all get it. Sometimes you're like, I'm sick, I have 104-degree fever, and I can't miss school. I need a PowerPoint. I need a PowerPoint because you know what? I just need them to just sit. Let's look. Let's talk. Nobody moves too much. That's fine. Okay. So we have the curriculum, but we've also taken all of the slideshows, okay, and put them according to each module, what we call modules, up here, so you can pull that out. So maybe you have your own awesome lesson on, let's say, ethics, but you want a PowerPoint that goes with it. Here's one on ethics and column writing. Okay. So there are 14 modules, what we call modules. News writing, feature writing, ethics, law and ethics, design, team building, entrepreneurship, everything. Those will be collapsed eventually probably into 12. I think we're going to just do writing all as one and kind of break it out a little bit. But you could teach like one lesson every day and not run out of lessons for like years. Okay, then the photojournalism curriculum is like 19 weeks long or something like that. Like it's huge. So lots of really good stuff. So under news literacy, I just want to show you the breakdown here. We give, for all the modules, you give the maximum amount of time. So if you wanted to teach everything, you wanted a standalone news literacy class, we think it would take about 7 weeks. Give or take, depending on whether you're on block schedule, modified, 50 minutes, whatever. Okay? You only want to teach the littlest amount possible. Maybe you would do 2 weeks. You would spend 2 weeks on news literacy. Okay? And that doesn't, it's not like every lesson is 1 day. Some lessons is 2 days. Some lessons are 20 minutes. Some lessons are 3 days. Okay, so you would have to kind of look at it and plan. So one thing I tell everybody about this curriculum, and not just mine, but all of JA's curriculum, it is not like plug and play. You walk into the classroom at 7 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I think I'll teach this. Do look at it before, like I'm not judging, okay? We've had those days, like, what am I going to teach today? But you can't do that with this curriculum only because sometimes it says, like, they should do this the day before, or they should bring this to class with them, or whatever. Give yourself 24 hours before you want to engage with any of the lessons. Okay, so I'll just show you the units here, and then we're going to get into a couple of examples. Unit 1, or the first week, is the foundations of news literacy. So that's when they would understand the main concepts. They would start to evaluate their own media use. They keep a media log. What media do they engage with? How often? For what purposes? Why news matters. So we start to talk about why news is still important in our society, why it's so greatly needed. A little bit about how the American newsroom has changed and where we're at with that. Unit 2 is about fact-checking. Sorry for these breaks. There we go. Information and fact-checking. So, is curation really journalism? Just because I pull it from all these sites, does that make it journalism? How do I fact-check a website, a story? Where would I start? How do I determine truth from social media? Unit 3 is on, you guys, am I like going away here? I think I don't want to do this. Unit 3 is on bias and credibility. So the idea that we talked about earlier, we seek what we believe, is the main sort of tenet. And all of that it's really discussed in very accessible terms for students. It's not discussed from this like media theory kind of level, okay? So it's all really accessible. Who is a journalist? That kind of stuff, evaluating website credibility. Week 4 is the business of media, so we talk about who owns the news, what are models for funding the news. We explore like the BBC Trust, what that might mean, this divide between government and information, and is it helpful, hurtful, are there other options, what do we think? Hybrid platforms, okay, so this to me is just like, instead of news literacy, it's media literacy, because we look at entertainment or photographs, visual literacy. Week 6 is actually a week-long final project, so that's where they would sort of culminate and do their own engagement. And then week 7 is that addendum of news literacy for the publication staff. Okay, so you could look. And if you haven't done, how many of you do like reader focus groups for your yearbook or your newspaper? Do it, okay? Totally do it. That is a great lesson for bringing in news literacy to your journalists and also engaging your audience. If you haven't sat down with if your students haven't sat down with their peers and said, what do you want to see in the yearbook? That's a good place to start at the beginning of the year. Summer's a good time to plan for that. The first couple weeks, I know some of you already have like your ladder and things like that, but a reader focus group does 2 things. It shows to your audience that you're really highly interested in making sure this is a product that they want to buy, and it makes you a better journalist at the same time. That's news literacy at its finest, because we're dealing with both the consumers and the suppliers, and everybody is becoming more clear and getting on the same page with expectations, what we might see, how they can contribute, what role do they play. It's a really great exercise. It takes some time. You've got to kind of plan for it and execute it. So that's a rundown of the curriculum. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull out a couple examples, a couple lessons, and just kind of talk them through with you in a similar way that I might talk them through with my students, so you can kind of see what these lessons look like. The lessons are all, have any of you opened like any lesson to see how it's written? No. Let me just show you just so you can kind of see. Every single one is written like this. So it's got the title, the description, the summary, and this is across all modules, not just news literacy. They all look exactly like this. The objectives, the Common Core State Standards, the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, the length. I wrote all of mine to be 15 minutes, and that's because I think news literacy is really hard in like chunks of 60, 75 minutes. I think it's a lot. Like I really think it's better to kind of do smaller chunks if you can, but other lessons will be written differently. And then materials and resources. All of these pop up as PDFs or JPEGs, so you can print them, show them to your class. So for instance, in this one, the students look at, and you could download this and save it as a JPEG and it'll print fully, but this is the front page from the Virginia pilot, so they can use that as a class set. So you can see how there's some prep to some of these lessons. You would have to go in and print some things. And then we give you the lesson step by step. So approximately what you do in the lesson and how long each part takes. And there's some talking points, and ask your students, highlight this bit of information, discuss this concept first, that kind of stuff. Okay? It's not prescriptive. We don't tell you every single word to say, because that just is, that doesn't work. We know that as teachers. But we give you a really nice, like, frame it in this way, or kind of lead into the discussion in this way, and that's what you can kind of use as your guide. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So that's what you would kind of use as your guide, and then now I'm going to kind of show you in practice what some of those lessons look like. Any questions so far?
I noticed that you have journal responses and for students to reflect on their media log. So is that something that is pretty, has continuity through most of the lessons? Is that something, because I don't use media logs mostly because I just don't want to break them, and I have a hard time collecting, giving them back in time, having them still write, when do they write, so I just kind of, with journals and logs. So I'm curious about how you implemented that, or is that, again, like I said, continuity through all the lessons that are up there?
Yeah, every week has, I'm pretty sure, every week has one or two journal entries. And so it might not be in the first lesson of the week, it might be in like the third lesson of the week, where your assignment, instead of rubric assignment or an assessment, is a journal entry. And so each week has at least one, and I think a couple might have two. So they're basically doing it on a weekly basis and turning it in, and then they would get it back at the start of the next week. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's how I do it. I don't grade for mechanics. I don't grade for grammar when I do it. And I tell them that up front, and not that you're getting away with murder, because if I can't read it, I'm just not going to grade it, period. So I make that statement up front. If it is so poorly written, or handwriting, or so many spelling errors, I just won't grade it at all. But I don't grade for that kind of stuff. I grade for, did you answer the prompt, and can I tell that you thought critically about how this related to you?
Is it one of those things that you could have them just the important thing is that you go through the thought process and write, and you maybe don't collect it every time?
It depends on your students.
Okay.
I would say I have taught students that I could do that with, and I know they would do the work, and then I've had classes where they wouldn't. If they didn't think they were handing it in every week, they wouldn't do it right.
Okay.
So yeah, it depends on your students.
True.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in the lesson, it says that this is a list for this many students. What if the students all have tablets?
This is a list for, I'm sorry, I'm not fully following.
It says class set, Virginia pilot front page.
Okay, so then you could either email it to them, or you could, I mean, you don't want to give them the login probably to go on here and get it, so they have access to like a student server then, so you would probably like want to dump that image into their class server and, label it like lesson, whatever day, and here are your materials for this lesson, and pull it up. Does that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Our school uses, across the board, we are required to. We use ASNEmo, so that's where I load stuff, and then the kids just go to the ASNEmo site, pull up the assignment, any graphics or whatever, and they can.
Yeah.
And then they can submit their work through ASNEmo as well.
Do you have them earn badges?
I haven't.
I was just
So maybe
wondering,
there's a difference.
so my staff is set up into different like jobs, positions, that sort of thing. And so news literacy is something that everybody could coordinate with, but I noticed that you also have some like photojournalism stuff. Is this the type of thing where like, while the news literate or my, reporters are out finding stories, my photojournalists could be being taught about the photojournalism stuff, all during like your boot camp or
Yes.
whatever it is to set it up? It's set
Absolutely,
like that?
yeah, that's a great question. This curriculum is all, you can layer it, right? So if you have a photo staff, send them to work on the photo curriculum, like, here's your lesson on f-stop, like, you need to master this by the end of the week, totally. So you can layer that while you're doing news writing lesson with your intro reporters, definitely.
Okay.
Great question. Okay, so let's look at a couple things here. So this is a good example from the fact checking lesson. And some of you probably remember seeing this. This is, and again, I like to use this as an example of why we can't publish this everywhere, because like, even though this is a screenshot, this is copyrighted. Okay, so it's good to remind your students, like, just because you can capture an image off the web doesn't mean you own it. You have the right to like do whatever you want with that. Okay, so but this, these are two tweets from CNN. One saying the Supreme Court strikes down the individual mandate, okay, of the healthcare law. And then about 20 minutes later, just kidding, okay, the Supreme Court approves all of it, okay? They back all parts of President Obama's healthcare initiative. This was like a major debacle for CNN at this point. But what I'd like to focus on for my students is looking at and having a discussion about how do we fact check, how can we use some things on social media to better understand what we should double check, what's true, what's false. So you'll see the original one that was incorrect got about 1,200 retweets. We don't know how many retweets are retweets, so we don't really know. But it's a good measure of like this went out to a lot of people. And it probably went from them to a lot of people. And then you look at the correction, and the correction went out to about 4,000. About 4,000 retweets. Why do you think, there could be many reasons, but I think there are a few that are important. Why do you think the retweet, or the correction got more retweets than the original false one? People are trying to fix it, yeah, they're trying to fix misinformation. So this is one of those good examples of how not to make cynics, because this is like, social media, it created the problem, but hey, it's also trying to fix the problem. So that's cool. Okay, what else?
I think people last time calling people loving them.
Yeah, okay. Hey, check it out, you can't trust CNN because they got it wrong. Okay, so if a student sees that something is wrong, this is a great part to talk about the ethical part of fact checking as like a producer of news and as a consumer. If I'm fact checking something, I'm fact checking Twitter. Do I assume that any incorrect tweet is going to be deleted? It's going to stay up there? What do you think your students believe happens to incorrect tweets? They think they're probably deleted. I think a lot of students would say, well, why wouldn't you just delete that? And then you only have the right one to reference. But a lot of news organizations don't do that as part of the transparency. You know, it's like they don't go and burn every copy of the newspaper if there's a typo to like wipe it from the historical record. So we don't do that. So a lot of social media doesn't do that with incorrect tweets. So then you can talk about, well, what should we do? Like, what if people didn't see the correction?
What about treating your students like that? Because the one thing I tell my kids is, from day one, I said, you better watch what you say on Twitter now. Because I try to treat them as like any journalist. And I show them examples of like how journalists can be called out and all that stuff. So what would you, how would you suggest like telling them the same stuff, like don't delete any more tweets and all that kind of, or do you, or also yes, do you tell your kids the same thing, like watch what you tweet and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've seen examples of even people who are not journalists, but they're professionals in their Twitter account, somebody didn't like it and they got fired for it. Your staff should have in your staff manual, your staff policies, a policy for this. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I worked at a private high school, like, if there was something wrong on our social media, we had to delete it. Like, we didn't have a choice. That was the mandate. We had no First Amendment rights. So I think it's going to vary, and, you know, you do have to make the choice, but it should be a process, not a guess. Not a guess when something goes wrong. It has to be part of your staff process. Everybody's educated on it. You know, maybe you have a social media editor or whomever is in charge of doing that kind of stuff should know, okay, this happened, we added something incorrect, here's exactly what we do. And so do you just post it to Twitter? Like, should CNN have also put on their breaking news website, CNN tweet false? Like, should they have done that? Maybe. As a consumer, I would say yeah. And so, you know, that's a conversation you can have. I love this example. This is another one here. This was in May, like April, May of 2013 in the spring. This came from the Associated Press. And this is breaking: 2 explosions in the White House with Barack Obama is injured. You guys remember this?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. AP got hacked.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in minutes, like minutes, okay, the stock market lost billions of dollars. Like 200 billions. There's a great chart, which I didn't include on here, that shows the dip, like the 30 seconds, you know, of how many dollars were lost while they were figuring this out. AP is global. It goes everywhere, okay? And suddenly, the whole world thinks that America is under attack. That has huge ramifications, okay? This is why fact-checking isn't just important because your reputation is at stake, but it might be your community, okay? It might be that there are, you know, parents, like the Facebook example, there's a shooter at the school. Like, it's not just about what happens to the students, it's about the whole community. It's about parents and teachers and brothers and sisters. So, it only took like minutes for AP to figure it out and take it down and issue like, hey, AP was hacked. And the stocks recovered by the end of the day. There was not a net loss. Okay, so that's something to know as part of this whole story. But what came out of it was this really cool story about how do we know that the AP tweet was false. This is why your students have to engage with all kinds of media all the time, because if they don't, none of this would have been a red flag for them. You want them to engage with media enough that certain things pop up with a little red flag, consumer flag, like, let me check. So, how do we know this was false? Number one, the lack of all caps. It's called AP style for a reason. There's a whole book named after these people, okay? Like, they're gonna get their tweets correct. So, if it's not AP style, you should stop and wonder. And as students, as journalists, they can be ambassadors for like their other students and say, oh, well, actually there's conventions for this. This is how journalists normally do it. So if this is not what's being done, question it, okay? So not AP style. Errant capital, again, not AP style. Clause issues, again, not AP style. And you know, I mean, that's one, like students don't know what a clause is, so they may not see that. I get it, okay? Barack Obama is not AP style. President Obama, okay, President Barack Obama, but never just Barack Obama. There's a missing period. This is one that students actually should understand because, you know, there's only so many characters. If the tweet is less than that and they had room for it, then there should be punctuation for most journalists. This is also why it's important for you and your staff to have a social media guide so that your tweets are consistent, so that you have a style, so that readers know what to expect from you, and then if something is off, they can question it. Okay? And then this one I think is really, really interesting. So if you look back, this is what the tweet looked like. There was nothing else to indicate where it came from because it came from the web. Somebody actually sat at twitter.com and hacked into AP and published it directly from the website. Now normally Twitter uses, or AP uses, like social flow, like there's TweetDeck, Hootsuite, other types of platforms that push out content. And it will say at the bottom of most AP tweets, it will have that little tag with the date, the time, and the platform that was pushing it for them. And they didn't have that, so that was also a red flag. So if this lesson counteracts that notion that students have, that there is no way to fact check. There's no way to know if something's wrong. How would I know? I don't record everything, I don't do everything. How would I know? Well, if you read, if you watch, if you kind of make it a part of your daily habit, you may not know exactly, but your intuition will kick in, and then you do something about it, and then you start to process some things. This is another great example. Okay, this is an example I use about how the media, like new media, rocks it sometimes. So we all remember Edward Snowden, NSA operative, stole some files, went to Russia on the run, blah blah blah. Poor Eric Snowden, who is a programmer at Adobe, forever has had his digital identity linked to Edward Snowden because every journalist and their mother was getting it wrong and saying Eric instead of Edward. So this guy is like so fed up and he's like, I gotta fix this. How do I fix this? Because you Google me and comes up Eric or Edward. Try it right now. I encourage you to Google like Edward Snowden, but in your little drop down you'll probably see Eric Snowden. Okay. So he went to Storyfy and he said, at the very least, if everybody's gonna get it wrong, I'm going to go on the record, and I'm going to show them how they're getting it wrong, and Storyfy is going to be my living will of how I am not Edward Snowden. Okay? This is cool. Like, media can empower us. New media gives us tools to respond to how the old media is screwing it up. Like, this is awesome. Okay, so he goes on and he compiles his own Storyfy, which if you use Storyfy, you know it's a way, gives you a timeline. You put together pieces of media coverage to tell a story. He's telling the story of his misidentification. So, the Huffington Post calls Apple, you know, their tweet says Apple co-founder calls Eric Snowden NSA whistleblower a hero. So, HuffPost got it wrong. Here's some random citizen, bless her heart, who figured it out, like she was getting it. In my dream, someone said Eric Snowden instead of Edward, and I didn't correct them because I thought, what's the point?
Did you see the one from the All-Star game? The CBS called Derek Jeter Michael Jeter?
No.
And they were like posting. It was funny. It was very, very funny.
I mean, you know, if somebody accidentally called me Derek Jeter, like that probably wouldn't ruin my life. It'd be awkward because I'm female and all sorts of other things. But this is like problematic, right? Because he's not a traitor, he's not a whistleblower. That's pretty funny. So again, Eric Snowden. Somebody else says, watching two people yell at each other on Fox News over Snowden, both Democrat and Republican analysts calling him Eric Snowden. Hashtag informed. You know. Okay. Isn't Eric Snowden an Adobe guy? He's trying to figure it out. There was another tweet, which I don't think I put it in there. That's really funny. Just for comedic sake, and it says, you know, so basically, Eric/Edward Snowden is living out that shitty Tom Hanks movie in an airport. Yeah. Okay.
Can you go back to the AP one for a minute?
Sure.
And then who has so to be verified, what is that? It has that blue check mark that it's verified. But is that just the number of followers you have? Or is it
up there?
Yeah, the blue check mark.
Oh yeah, it's just because like I follow them. Yeah.
Actually, it means the account's verified.
Oh, the account, right? Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean.
But
In this case, the account was verified, it was hacked.
But the actual account was hacked.
So that shouldn't necessarily be the truth.
Right.
So I'm asking, does verified mean you have a certain number of followers, or that you've been verified by?
It means you've been verified by Twitter. I think
By Twitter.
It came out of mostly celebrities.
Right.
So,
That is the official account of that
that's
person.
right.
So if you go back
But
to
it's
the,
optional.
Right.
if you go back to the company post, I would assume they would be a verified account.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question to ask. You would think, but they may
Maybe the
not
hacker
be.
knew to put that in there.
What's that?
Maybe the hacker knew to put that in there.
I mean, well, you can't do that because that comes from Twitter. Like, they would have to probably get into that. I don't know that they can do that. But those are good questions. I don't know. Okay, so here's a lesson that would come maybe from the business side of things. And you could give students this chart, you could print it and hand it out, and ask them to spend, 5-10 minutes circling every media they use. So, MTV, Star, FX, whatever, CNN, maybe they watch NASCAR.com, they go on there. Just circle the things that they, use regularly, okay, on a pretty regular basis. And then you can show them on a screen like who owns that media. So each column is actually the subsidiaries of a major media company. And this is a good entrance into the discussion of, you think because you're reading lots of different websites or you're watching lots of different stations that you might be getting your news from lots of sources, but at the end of the day, there's a company that owns all of that, okay? And again, it's not that simple, right? We know it's not that simple, but yeah.
There's an excellent video example I use for Good Morning America doing a story on a new ride at Disney World. And not a single time during the whole thing do they say, we're owned by Disney and Disney World's owned by Disney.
Yeah.
So to them, they're presenting it as news.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly there's some synergy there.
Yeah, exactly. And so, why does this matter? Your students at home, why does it matter who owns what? For one, because it's a false sense of diversity. It's a false sense that you're getting, all of these different, ideas, whatever. And what that means is because every media company is structured differently. So this is where it gets a little technical, because you might say words like shareholders and markets, and the lessons would talk about that and help you explain that. There is a Colbert clip in about 2 minutes, so if you are getting glossy-eyed, hang tight on that. We'll get there, okay? But it's a false sense of comfort because we think we're getting it from multiple sources. And then you could make the argument that, for example, let's go back to 2003 when we were invading Iraq, okay? NBC was one of the many stations that we now know, looking back, did not do their due diligence in investigating whether there actually were weapons of mass destruction, just like many other, I'm not picking them out, but they work in this example, okay? Who was NBC owned by in 2003? Does anybody know? It's changed a little bit.
General Electric.
General Electric. What does General Electric also own? Military manufacturers. Okay, they are making, in 2003, NBC is 24/7, are we going to war? And General Electric's other subsidiaries are making jet engines. This matters, okay? This matters, and it's not, again, and then I say, but, it's not as if the head honcho at GE was saying, go to war, make the tanks, go to war, make the tanks. Nobody was doing that, okay?
I don't know about that.
Well, fair enough, okay? So it's what matters, because we want to know, where are companies linked? Where might they be double dipping in terms of profit, okay? And how are they kind of building up off of each other? And knowing all that, can we trust the information that we're getting? Sometimes the answer is still, yeah, pretty much. Sometimes it's stop, hold up, yellow light, caution, okay? So that's a good example. So they think that they're getting it from all these places, when in reality there's 6 major corporations. Much different than the landscape in even 1983. There's also, I haven't done a lesson on net neutrality, but that's going to come for this fall, because I think that that's something that they need to know about now too, with all the new